Yeah. Good evening, everyone. I am Dr. Vishwanath from Yashoda Hospital. Today we are going to have a talk on achalasia cardia. It is actually a disorder affecting the esophagus where patients come to us with difficulty in swallowing with other symptoms of chest pain and food coming out. So this disorder is not very common, but we are seeing it more often recently. And there are many medical and surgical modalities to tackle this. Today we have three gems of gastroenterology to discuss about this topic. Uh, First will be by Professor Dr. Ravi Shankar. He is HOD and the director of the endoscopy and gastroenterology unit at Yashoda Hospital, followed by senior consultant Rakesh for endoscopic management by like POEM. And third will be senior surgical gastroenterologist, Dr. Prasad Babu Garu. So we'll start with Dr. Ravi Shankar Garu. Sir, over to you.
Thank you, Vishwanath, for the introduction. And thank you all for being with us today. So today's topic is divided into three portions. One is introduction about the achalasia cardia and the various aspects. The second one would be the treatment, that is the endoscopic treatment POEM. And the third one would be the surgical management of achalasia cardia. Now I will run through some of the practical aspects of achalasia cardia. The disorder has been known for a long, and it has been thought as stricture at the bottom, that is around the LES area, and the dilatation of the esophagus. So nowadays we describe achalasia as a dilated esophagus, and the main problem is at the lower esophageal sphincter. Basically, it is not a stricture, but it is a failure to relax the gastroesophageal junction or the lower esophageal sphincter precisely. It doesn't relax when the food comes. So over a period of time, the esophagus gets dilated. So achalasia is primarily a motor disorder of the esophagus, and the characteristic feature is loss of LES relaxation and loss of esophageal peristalsis. This leads to difficulty in swallowing or dysphagia to solids and liquids. And when the food stays in the esophagus, there can be regurgitation. And because of the motor dysfunction, there can be chest pain. There is weight loss that is seen in some patients. When we do endoscopy, retained fluid is seen in the esophagus, and esophagus may appear little dilated. On endoscopy also, sometimes we find a little bit of the puckering of the G junction. On barium swallow, bird beaking or narrowing of the esophagus could be demonstrated. And dilated esophagus also can be seen by barium swallow. So what is the incidence and prevalence? It occurs equally in men and women. The incidence is about 1 in 1 lakh, and the prevalence is about 10 in 1 lakh. And the peak incidence seems to be 30 to 40 years. The etiology seems to be either autoimmune or viral or neurodegenerative, but basically we do not know what exactly causes achalasia cardia. What is the consequence of all these abnormalities? There is a degeneration of the ganglion cells in the myenteric plexus of the esophageal body and LES, and there is a loss of inhibitory neurotransmitters, and consequently, because of the excitatory stimuli and lack of inhibitory stimuli, the esophagus, the lower esophageal sphincter gets constricted, and there is an incomplete relaxation of the LES. So once we understand that a patient is suspected to be having achalasia cardia, then we need to precisely diagnose and say that this is achalasia cardia. That basically the patient comes to the clinician or presents to the hospital with a history of difficulty in swallowing, and in some instances there is regurgitation. So we need to take a detailed history and perform a barium swallow, an endoscopy, and based on these findings, a high resolution manometry. So this is a barium swallow of the one of the patients of achalasia, where a sigmoid esophagus is noted on the left side and a normal esophagus is given for reference on the right side. The classical findings in barium swallow would be bird beaking type, and then aperistalsis, and then poor emptying of the barium. Once the achalasia progresses for several years, one can notice tortuosity, angulation, and a significantly dilated esophagus, as we have seen in the previous picture called sigmoid esophagus. Well, nowadays, because of the advancements and many centers having all the facilities, we don't see this type of achalasias, but we see patients who come with dysphagia of shorter duration. And in these patients, though we do the same type of tests, the tests have been modified and the barium swallows have a different type of importance nowadays. It is a timed barium esophagogram. This is used for objective evaluation of achalasia and identifies the patients who have recurrence despite initial relief after treatment. And as we are seeing in the picture, patient swallows in a standing position about 150 ml of the barium, and 3 pictures are taken at 1 minute, 2 minutes, and 5 minutes. And the importance of this I will describe in the coming slides. So the timed barium esophagogram needs to be interpreted like this. There are 2 horizontal lines that are drawn. One is at the lower end of the esophagus, and then one at the upper end of the barium that is seen. It is not at the upper end of the esophagus, but it is at the upper end of the barium level. So in this, we are seeing 3 different levels. At 1 minute, there is one particular level, and again at 5 minutes, there is a slight difference. And the diameter also is measured. So vertical height is measured and horizontal diameter at the widest portion of the esophagus is measured. And these are done at 1 minute, 2 minutes, and 5 minutes. These are very important because to know the response of response to treatment, ideally, it is ideal to have these timed barium esophagograms. So one quick example I will show. I will not discuss about the C and D picture, but A and B picture. There has been a achalasia classical and timed barium esophagogram has shown the picture. And in the B picture, it has emptied faster after the treatment. The bottom colored pictures are the correlations with the manometry, where initially there has been high pressure at the LES, and subsequent to treatment, the pressure has lowered and there has been empty. In the C and D picture, the patient has not responded to treatment. That's why the timed barium esophagogram has shown almost a similar appearance. So this timed barium esophagogram is very important mainly to the doctors who treat these achalasias, because there is a definition of poor response in achalasia treatment. 50% or more reduction in the post height as compared to the previous height, then that is fine. But if the height reduction is less than 50%, it is taken as failure. So what happens is sometimes when we do a treatment for achalasia, there is a subjective improvement. Patient says that there is symptomatic improvement, but when we do the timed barium esophagogram, that may show a failure. That means these patients are likely to come back sooner or later with the same symptoms. That's why the timed barium esophagogram has become very important. So after the barium study, we have the manometry. This is the manometry about this water perfusion system is usually used by majority of the units, and this is a tracing of normal tracing of esophageal manometry. And based on the manometry, there is a classification, and the achalasia is typed into 1, 2, 3 types, and there are also other manometric minor disorders, but achalasia is a very important disorder, and manometry differentiates achalasia from other motility disorders. And this Chicago classification has given three types of achalasia, and type 1, type 2, and type 3. The categorization into these types is very important because the treatment responses is based on these typing. For example, type 2 may respond to majority of the types of treatments, whereas type 3, pneumatic dilatation, the response rates are less. Below are given the three types of manometric features. So there is also a role of endoscopic ultrasound in achalasia, where we suspect a pseudoachalasia, where it's not exact achalasia, but tumor infiltration may cause an achalasia-like picture, in that the thickening of the lower end of the esophagus could be noted, and that's how the role of US in achalasia. So there is also a Eckart score for evaluation of achalasia, and this sometimes is very important for doctors who treat achalasia. But anyway, we'll not go into all the details of the Eckart score, but this is important in managing the patients. So what's the treatment of achalasia and what is the aim of treatment? So one needs to relieve the patient's symptoms, improve the esophageal emptying, and prevent further dilatation of the esophagus. So what are the various modalities of treatment of achalasia? There are drugs, calcium channel blockers and ISMO, but the results are not at all good. That's why these drugs as treatment of achalasia is given up. The endoscopic modalities are botulinum toxin injection, pneumatic dilatation, POEM, and the surgical managements are laparoscopic Heller's myotomy and fundoplication, esophagectomy. So botulinum toxin is injected, but the results are not very satisfying. The results are temporary, and basically with the botulinum toxin, the smooth muscle constrictor fibers are destroyed transiently only, and there can be some response, but this is not a very useful treatment, and this is not generally followed. But in some sick patients or old patients, this can be utilized. Then coming to pneumatic dilatation, which is one of the treatments. And earlier, there was only a pneumatic dilatation for achalasia. Of course, surgery was there. So now the new endoscopic treatments have come up like POEM. But achalasia cardia has been treated for long with pneumatic dilatation. And even now, it is one of the important methods by which achalasia is treated. So pneumatic dilatation, there are certain principles which, if followed, the results could be good. Only the in the highlighted ones you could see the patient is better positioned in supine position. Again, these practical aspects are important in for people who treat these patients. So compared to the left lateral position, supine could be better, and always locate the LES area by radio-opaque markers when we do the endoscopy on fluoro examination, and then preferably use a 30 millimeter balloon for the first dilatation so that the perforation rate is less. And subsequently, if there is a second dilatation is required, we can go for 35 millimeters balloon. Obliteration of the waist of the obliteration of the waist, that is the narrowing at the earlier LES when the balloon is inflated, and obliteration of this waist should be done ideally. Ideally, the inflation should be for 60 seconds and repeated for 3 times. Sometimes we prefer to do once or twice only, but most ideal and the most standard way is to do for 3 times. And the balloon should be prevented from slipping into the stomach during inflation, and this needs to be held tightly so that it doesn't slip. All these are very practical aspects and we need to follow. If we don't follow, and there can be a failure rate of pneumatic dilatation. So pneumatic dilatation, the results sometimes are reported as quite good and sometimes are reported as not so great. The perforation rate with the 30 millimeter balloon seems to be 1% compared to the 9% with 35 millimeter balloon. So usually the preference is a 30 millimeter balloon. And some of the studies have shown that comparing laparoscopic Heller's myotomy with pneumatic dilatation, there has been no difference between the success of treatment at 1 to 2 year follow-up. Well, I'm saying always that every study should be taken with a pinch of salt, and it need not be applied to our practice. But we need to know, understand how the responses and what is the experience world over. So definitely these studies need to be considered. And if we take the one of the studies, pneumatic dilatation equivalent to laparoscopic myotomy in type 2 achalasia, but inferior in type 1 and 2. So overall, after all these results, it has been found that the pneumatic dilatation seems to be a good modality in type 2 achalasia. So summarizing, pneumatic dilatation can be performed in achalasia with acceptable positive results. So different types of achalasia, there is a first line treatment and second line treatment. And just let's look at the type 2 where pneumatic dilatation has been said as a first line treatment, and second line treatment in type 2 is POEM or laparoscopic Hellers myotomy. Whereas in type 3, pneumatic dilatation is not said as the first modality. And if you take type 1, any modality can be used as first line. So the response rates in type 2 seem to be quite good. Just to see the horizontal line of type 2 where pneumatic dilatation has been 100%. But anyway, in this study, it has been 100%, but generally the type 2 also, the response rates could be around 80%. So what are the other modalities of treatment apart from pneumatic dilatation? We have told that the drug treatment is not so good. The botulinum toxin is usually for high risk population who cannot undergo surgery, who cannot undergo POEM, and in whom pneumatic dilatation is going to be risky. And pneumatic dilatation is to be applied in patients. In majority, it can be applied. The response rates are good in the second type of the 3 varieties of achalasia cardia. And the 3 varieties of achalasia cardia have to be differentiated by esophageal manometry. Now, the other modalities apart from the pneumatic dilatation is POEM and laparoscopic Hellers myotomy. And I pause here to hand over the proceedings to my other friends and colleagues who perform these procedures, and I requested Dr. Vishwanath to take over. Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Very nicely summarized. Yeah, we'll go to the next modality for treatment of achalasia cardia. It will be Dr. Rakesh. Over to Rakesh.
Yeah, thanks, Vishwanath. I think Ravi Shankar sir was very, very comprehensive, especially the data. I think it was very exhaustive, sir. You really did, you really went deep to get out the data. So I'll just share up my screen. Oh, 1 second, I think I'm having some. There is some issues, sir. 1 second.
As there are some technical thing, we'll just ask Ravi Shankar sir to tell something about the success rate in his experience, not the literature, the experience of pneumatic dilatation in achalasia cardia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Achalasia, actually, I love to do pneumatic dilatation because I find it as a very useful modality for the patients. Once Rakesh is there, I can immediately stop. Okay.
Yeah, sir. I'm just working on it, sir.
Yeah. Once you are ready, I can stop. Are you ready, Rakesh?
Almost, sir. I think I'm done, sir. I'm sharing.
Yeah, please do.
Dr. Rakesh, please unmute.
I think audible, sir, now?
Yeah, yeah, you're audible.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I had a technical glitch there, sir. I think the screen is audible, visible, I believe.
Yeah, it's visible.
Yeah.
Sorry for the technical issue. So I think as Ravi Shankar sir was enumerating what are all the options we have for management of eclasia, I would probably looking into one specific aspect of it, probably the one that has been rapidly coming up in the last few years, and it has overtaken the other modalities of managing eclasia quite comprehensively. And this is a minimally invasive endoscopic procedure called as peroral endoscopic myotomy, or POEM to be short. To begin with, of course, I'm not going to dwell much into the historics because Dr. Ravi Shankar sir has done a comprehensive job there. But to put it in one slide, eclasia, I think, is derived from a Greek word meaning failure to relax. So the cardia, or the first part of the stomach, is spastic, and this spastic sphincter doesn't function properly. So when you have a spasm of the lower esophageal sphincter, it leads to difficulty for the patient to swallow. And over a period of time, the food starts accumulating in the esophagus, and eventually over months to years, the esophagus gets widened and leading to regurgitation, aspiration, and failure to thrive on the part of the patient. Eclasia cardia is not a new entity. I think probably the first described, the first description of eclasia was made way back in 1600s, when Sir Thomas Williams, Wills, he noticed that certain amount of patients had a lot of difficulty in swallowing, and he attributed this to what is known as cardiospasm. And he in fact went on to use a whalebone as one way of trying to dilate the spastic lower esophageal sphincter, so that the patient can have some remission in these symptoms of dysphagia. So this was probably first described in literature way back in 1600. And from then on, over the next 300 years, people have tried to evolve some technique whereby the spastic or the spasm of the muscle can be reduced. And finally, it was in 1913 that Ernest Hellers, who is a surgeon, who proposed this idea that since it is a spastic muscle that is causing all the trouble, why not cut the muscle or do a myotomy of the muscle, thereby rendering it ineffective and thereby allowing the food passage easily into the stomach and leading to the elevation of the symptoms of the patient. And over the next 80 years, Heller's myotomy went on to become the most standard of care for all the patients of eclasia. A myotomy would give rise to a definite regression of patient symptoms, and most of the time the symptom regression was long lasting. And so for that reason, Heller's was the go-to procedure whenever we had an eclasia patient. Of course, from an endoscopist perspective, as Dr. Ravi Shankar sir has enumerated, we did have our own ways of trying to decrease the spasm in the lower esophageal sphincter. We had our pneumatic balloon dilatation, and also we had a Botox injection to go along with it. But the issue with these, that although they were quite effective, the problem was that the remission of symptoms or the pressure decrease was not very long lasting. Invariably, most of these patients by the end of 6 months to 1 year would come back with the similar sort of symptoms. So although we endoscopies had a solution for eclasia, it was not as perfect as what an Ehlers would be giving from the surgeon's side. So we as an endoscopist were in search for a technique that actually would be as effective as a surgeon. That is, we would be able to, from the endoscopy side, able to cut the muscle or do a myotomy, and at the same time do not end up causing what is known as perforation of the esophagus. And finally, the first man to probably come up with this idea was Pasricha, who way back in 2007, he gave his first proof of concept in the porcine model, where he said that probably myotomy can be done from an endoscopic side also. And the only way to avoid a frank perforation is that the mucosal incision and the myotomy should be wide apart. What I mean to say is that he has shown in his porcine models that he started giving a mucosal incision at least 10 to 15 centimeters proximal to the LES, and he would create a submucosal tunnel, and through this tunnel he would reach the LES, and then he perform the myotomy and come out. So this was first given as a proof of concept, and it was published in GI Endoscopy. It was received well, but there was also a lot of sarcasm due to the fact that you are trying to cut and deliberately induce a perforation. But one gentleman actually picked up this idea. That was Dr. Inoue, who is now considered to be probably as the father of peroral endoscopic myotomy. He took up this concept to the next level, and within the next 2 years, he went on to perform the first human peroral endoscopic myotomy. That was in 2008. And within the next 2 years, he performed it in almost 17 patients with 100% success rate. And this was published in a GI Endoscopy. Following his publication in 2010, I think POEM went on to become probably the most discussed and most demonstrated procedure in all the workshops that we went on to attend. And this procedure really evolved in a big way. So before I go further detail into what exactly constitutes as a peroral endoscopic myotomy, let me just briefly give you the idea that was behind this procedure. If you look at the normal mucosa of esophagus, it can be divided into epithelium, muscularis mucosa, submucosa, and the muscularis propria. The idea is that we want to reach the muscularis propria, and at the same time, we do not want to induce a full length perforation. So what we are trying to do here is that we are trying to create an incision and thereby enter into the submucosa, which is actually a very potential space. And through this submucosa, we try to tunnel in, reach the lower esophageal sphincter, and ultimately perform the myotomy just as a surgeon would do. So third space endoscopy is the name given to any application or a technique that involves performing a procedure in the submucosal space. And to put it in short, third space endoscopy or POEM is nothing but it's probably an offshoot of NOTES, a procedure that was actually developed by the surgeons. Of all the procedures that have come out of the natural orifice transluminal endoscopic surgery, I think POEM is one procedure that actually went on to persist, whereas most of the other NOTE procedure could not make it further. I will just take you directly to the procedure per se. So what exactly we do when we are planning to do a peroral endoscopic myotomy? Well, basically it consists of 4 definite steps. As I've already mentioned, the first step is that we want to enter the submucosa. So in order to enter the submucosa, at least 10 to 15 centimeter proximal to the LES, we would raise a mucosal bleb using 10 to 20 ml of normal saline, into which methylene blue is added. And we make an incision of 1 to 1.5 centimeter in the mucosa. And once the mucosa is breached, because you have infused a methylated fluid, the blue color, the bluish coloration is taken up by the submucosa. And once you have breached the mucosa, we enter into the submucosa and we slowly start creating a submucosal tunnel. In this tunnel, you can see that the muzzle is at the lower end and the mucosa is on the top side. So eventually we use this submucosal tunneling and we try to reach the lower esophageal sphincter, and we try to go beyond the esophageal sphincter at least 2 centimeters into the gastric side. And once you have made a tunnel and you have reached your lower esophageal sphincter, the most important step which the surgeon would do from through their laparoscopy site is myotomy, that is dissecting the spastic LES. So we not only dissect the lower esophageal sphincter, we also do a myotomy at least 5 centimeters proximal to it and at least 2 centimeters distal onto the gastric side. And once we have done a good myotomy, we would go to the 4th step, probably which is the most vital step. That is, we come out of the mucosal tunnel and then we safely close the mucosal incision that we have created. By closing the mucosal incision, technically, we have ensured that there is no through and through perforation. And at the same time, we were very effectively able to create a myotomy on the spastic esophageal muscle. So these four basic steps define peroral endoscopic myotomy. So how POEM is different from the gold standard Heller's myotomy? Well, to start off with, it's a very minimally invasive procedure, and it probably we do it in our regular endoscopic room with the standard equipment. The big advantage of POEM is that we have a full control on the extent of myotomy. What I mean to say is that if you have a type 3 eclasia where you want to do at least a myotomy of 10 to 15 centimeter on the esophageal side, this is something that is only possible if you are able to do it from the esophageal side, unlike the surgeons who would usually enter from the abdominal side. So that's a big advantage. So in short, you can probably tailor your myotomy according to the type of the eclasia you're dealing with. The other theoretical advantage probably we have over the Heller's myotomy is that you do not dissect the crura. So in short, you do preserve a lot of phrenicoesophageal membrane. So theoretically, it is supposed to mean that probably the reflux should be lesser compared to the Heller's. And of course, the other advantages is that the operative time is comparatively shorter. There's less blood loss. The hospital stay is never more than 1 day, and probably the patient probably can go back to early work. The other advantage of POEM over Heller's is the mode. And unlike the Heller's, where the surgeon myotomy is usually on the anterior side, we as endoscopists, when we enter through our endoscope, we have two routes or two options. That is, you have a posterior approach that is usually at between 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock. And at the same time, you have another approach that is anterior between 12 to 2 o'clock. So in a patient who has come back with a recurrence post Heller's, or even if the patient comes back with a recurrence of eclasia post POEM, you can always switch to the other side. If you have done a posterior approach, you can always go back to anterior approach. Thereby, even if you have a recurrent eclasia, probably you would not have much difficulty when doing a POEM. The other big advantage with POEM is that the entire thing, dissection, is done under vision. So chances of causing a mucosal injury are far less when compared to Heller's. So how effective is POEM? What does the literature says? Well, I am trying to show you a meta-analysis that was published, little older one. I think it's in 2017. By that time, Innovi has already done 500 and his data was published. AIG has already done 500 by that time. And if you look at the follow-up, it is almost up to 3 years. But what's more interesting is that the procedure was highly effective. More than 90% of their patients had a efficacy, both technically and clinically. They had a very excellent midterm results. And even in failed Heller's or patient who had recurrence after Heller, the POEM was not much difficult to perform, and their success was as good as a naive eclasia. So based on, I think this published literature probably shows you that eclasia is probably the efficacy is more than 90%. Let me look at the Heller's, which probably is considered as gold standard. How effective is Heller's? Well, this is I have taken it from the Annals of Surgery, which is the Bible for the surgeons. And this is a data published in 2009. And I think it's a meta-analysis of all the published literature on Heller's from 1990 to 2006. And I just put it short to prevent that busyness. In short is that they had nearly 3,888 patients in 35 studies that were published in 20 years without fundoplication and with fundoplication. And the meta-analysis showed that the symptomatic improvement in the patients without fundoplication was 89, and with fundoplication it was 90. And if you remember my previous slide, Innovi and et al. And the rest of the endoscopists who have done POEM, their efficacy was also at least 90%. So what I'm trying to say is that POEM was, the success rate of POEM probably is as equivalent to as Heller's. This one more paper that was again published in Annals of Surgery, 2014. Well, here it was a head-to-head study. by 2012 and 14, POEM started really becoming a big procedure. So I think they wanted to actually look in how good is it when compared to Hellers. And again, this was published in Annals of Surgery. They had 100 patients. It was a head-to-head study. 60 patients were posted for Hellers, and 40 patients, that is 37 patients, were posted for POEM. And the interesting finding was that the operative time for POEM was half, nearly half, or it was 120 minutes, whereas compared to Hellers, it was 150. The hospital stay was less compared to Hellers. And even the 1 month ECART score was significantly less with POEM compared to Hellers. So what the authors went on to conclude is that POEM is probably, for the first time, they concluded that is as good as Hellers when it comes to treating the patients of eclasia. And this was way back in 2014. I have one more paper that was published in 2018, again in the Annals of Surgery. Well, this time it was a systemic review and meta-analysis. What the authors have done is that they looked into the data of Hellers, that was nearly 5,000 patients, and they had 21 articles examining the POEM, that is nearly 2,000 patients. Again, the authors concluded that the short-term results of POEM is as good or probably even more effective than with Hellers when it comes to relieving dysphagia. And these are all the articles published in Annals of Surgery. So what about the patients who have actually come back with a recurrence? I mean, once they have a failed Hellers, what's the outlook of POEM? Again, this is a multi-center study. Worldwide, 13 centers were included, 180 patients, 90 were naive eclasia, and 90 patients were post-Hellers who came back with recurrence. And what was the interesting conclusion of this paper was that there was no big significant difference in the rate of adverse events, whether the patient was naive eclasia or it was a prior treatment failure. That is, the procedure did not have much difficulty to perform if the patient had undergone a prior procedure. So I think this was a big thing to say, in the sense that a redo Heller, I think probably Prasad Babu sir would add later on, a redo Heller in the hands of a regular surgeon might not be that easy compared vis-a-vis with a patient of naive eclasia where Hellers is being performed for the first time. So this paper actually went on to show that Hellers, POEM, whether you are doing it in a naive patient or a prior treatment failure, the outcomes are as good or similar, and adverse events are not much. So that was the conclusion of the paper. And I think this was the big paper that was published by John Hopkins, by Dr. Vivek Kumbhari, who again took up the exclusively type 3 eclasia, and he took nearly 75 patients of exclusively type 3. 49 patients were randomized to POEM and 26 to Hellers. The significant outcomes of the paper were that in type 3 eclasia, Hellers took almost 264 minutes compared to 102 minutes from the POEM side. The adverse events were limited, and more than that, the efficacy for POEM in type 3 was 98% compared with 80%, and the patients were followed up for 2 years before this data was published. So this paper actually went on to prove that if it's a type 3 eclasia, POEM is probably the first line of treatment to be given to these patients. So what are the points to ponder? Well, I think I would put it in one slide to put it. Is POEM effective if you have a straight type of eclasia? Well, I think my answer would be yes. Is POEM as effective as compared with the gold standard Hellers myotomy? I think my two papers which I have shown you, the meta-analysis published in 2008, would simply show you that probably POEM is as good as Hellers if you are dealing with type 1 and type 2 eclasia. And what about type 3 eclasia? Well, based on the Dr. Vivek's paper, now it is probably thought of that if you're having a type 3 eclasia, POEM is probably much better when you're having a type 3 eclasia vis-a-vis with Hellers myotomy. And what about patients who have come back with a failed Hellers? Again, the paper that you have published in Clinical Gastroenterology and Hepatology clearly showed that even if there is a prior Hellers being done, The second time a procedure like POEM does not have any adverse events, and the efficacy and the clinical outcomes are as good as being done for a naive patient. So what about the other diffuse motility disorders that you have in esophagus? Of course, they are rare, but diffuse esophageal spasm is one entity where the patient is troubled with dysphagia. Well, because these are the patients who require a longer myotomy, probably POEM would be the treatment of choice for them. And what about the age of the patient? Does age prelude the patient from POEM? Not exactly. In our series, we had patients above 70. We had 3 patients, 72, 74, and if I remember, 75-year-old, in which we all successfully done POEM, and the patients are doing fine. So even in elderly patients, age is no more a bar if you are considering POEM as a modality for achalasia. And one slide just to share our experience. In the last 3 years, we have done 93 patients of POEM. We had one failure where the patient came back 3 months later. I think this was the early learning curve where I had a patient coming back with recurrence of symptom. But for him, all the other patients are doing fine. We have now 3 years of data. I've been following them all. Most of the patients are in regression, and most of the patients do not come to the OPD for the simple reason that they are doing quite fine. Now our average procedure duration initially was 90 minutes. Now it has come down to 75 minutes. And now our average hospital stay of our patient is no more than 24 hours. And usually they are put in the general ward and they go the next day. So I think this was one question when I started doing POEM. This was one question which my surgical colleagues or my friends would ask me and taunt me. Just because you have learned a procedure, should you do it? So if I can do it, should I do it? That was their always a debate that I had with them. And whenever I came across them, this was my answer to them. If my patient is non-compliant for an endoscopic dilatation, if my patient desires a endoscopic procedure or that is minimally invasive, and if my patient has definitely a type 3 achalasia, and if he's going into a hospital where the expertise to do a POEM procedure is available, then yes, POEM should be the first line of management. This was my argument whenever I had my surgical colleagues arguing with me for their LS procedure. So with that, I think I will conclude. Thank you for the patient hearing, but questions and queries I would love to take up. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, Rakesh, very excellent comprehensive coverage of the procedure, and I think surgeon will be locking horns with you now. Over to Prasad Babu sir for his talk.
Yeah, I think I need to stop sharing.
Sir, you're live. You can share the screen.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. So is it audible?
Yes, sir, you can.
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Yeah. So, after the excellent presentations of Dr. Ravishankar and Dr. Rakesh, which is, very intelligently, he has skipped the problems of POEM and he has shown that it is only paradise. So, I think data you can take the way whatever you want it, but I think I think world is moving towards POEM. I think we have seen the several aspects of treatment modalities which started from fishbone to POEM today. It has seen a lot of upswings and downs of various procedures. Once upon a time in pneumatic dilatation, when the open surgery era, then switched over into laparoscopic Heller myotomy, then again coming towards into the hands of endoscopist, and especially because the disease is seen by endoscopist, because more and more pushing towards a POEM, because that's also another scenario why is getting into it. This is where you call a mega esophagus and sigmoid esophagus, where still there is a role for surgeon. So why there is a lot of confusion about the achalasia treatment and also what is good, and this is an always debate, because important thing of achalasia treatment is we are not giving a cure, we are aiming at a palliation. Because any treatment modality, we are not looking at a cure. And there is always a difference in how you effectively, the scoring pattern, how you are assessing the symptomatic response, what are you assessing, it varies from a different institution to institutions. And the disease is not very common, the data opacity, paucity is there, and quality of index difference, and the long-term follow-up is important, because usually as the time passes by, the results, the success rate comes down in achalasia. So this is a cardiomyotomy where historically people started doing. Then if coming to laparoscopy, we have achalasia. Vigorous achalasia is a term earlier we used to use. Now I think probably it has become type 3. And hypertensive lower esophageal sphincter. And DES and nutcrackers is less reliable, as already Dr. Rakesh told that earlier we used to use this modality for laparoscopic cardiomyotomy. So there are certain controversies with myotomy. What is approach, length, whether reflex procedure is important or not, and which type of fundoplication, what is its role in sigmoid esophagus. So if you go through it, the people used to do laparoscopically and thoracoscopically. So if you see that the thoracic part, the problem is you won't add a fundoplication in a thoracic approach. In a laparoscopy, you can do that. And so by and large, now the world is moving towards a laparoscopy rather than to a thoracoscopic Heller map. The extent of myotomy is standard myotomy versus extended myotomy. And so if you see that the dysphagia improves when you extend the myotomy to 3 centimeters at the cost of a reflex. But here a very important aspect is one has to be liberal enough, little bit, because you want to relieve dysphagia. So somewhere 2.5 is extent is important onto the gastric side. Usually on esophagus side we do around 6 centimeters of myotomy. And in case wherever if you want to perform, again you can extend a little more further with a little more. If you are little patient enough, you can do still more length in up to 10 centimeters. Up to that also you can achieve by doing a laparoscopic endoscopy. What's the role of fundoplication? So the real crux of surgical aspect is the complication of any myotomy is reflex. The reflex procedure is up to the tune of 45% if you do a myotomy, whether you do it laparoscopically or endoscopically. By adding fundoplication, you are decreasing the reflex rate close to 14% when from the 45%. So by adding this, there is no difference in dysphagia. Usually the fundoplications we do is partial fundoplications, either it is 180 degrees, what we call as a DOR, or 240 degrees, what we call stopius. Usually we avoid Nissen's fundoplication, that is complete wrap we avoid, because these people usually they don't have peristalsis in the esophagus. And if you see that which type of fundoplication is a DOR or tope, there is no evidence of this or that side, probably a matter of choice. But the advantage of DOR is if you have some perforations, you can cover with a DOR. Tope, we don't have that advantage. So by the end of the day, it is a matter of choice which type of fundoplication one would like to add. The role of what you call as cardiomyotomy in sigmoid esophagus. So there are certain, this data is all come from South America, where a lot of Chagas disease is there. In that also people they have done one series, they have done more than 6 centimeters. People, they started doing myotomy. They are given some certain series, they are given a success rate of up to 50%. So usual take is, if it is never done a procedure, one can try first a myotomy. Then if the myotomy is not helpful, one can go for esophagectomy. One more thing is robotic assisted myotomy. Is there any difference? The literature says there is no much difference between a robotic or a laparoscopic myotomy, except for the added cost. So, what about the prior interventions related to the myotomy? Whether the myotomy is causing more problems? Whether pneumatic dilatation, post-pneumatic dilatation, usually will not be having any problem while doing a surgery in post-pneumatic dilatation. This is the case. I think the problem mainly we face is one has to be very careful. If you have a patient who prior received a botulinum toxin, then if you are performing a surgery, because there one has to be very, very careful. The perforation rates are more common if it is prior botulinum toxin is injected. So these are all the complications, innumerable complications people talk about, but usually they are all minor complications. Esophageal perforation is not a big problem in a laparoscopic Hellas myotomy because majority of the times if the perforation happens usually we recognize during surgery, and always our protocol is we always do an endoscopy post procedure. Any leak we will find out during the endoscopy. We can close it there itself on the table, and you can buttress with a door. So usually perforation is not a big issue while we are doing a laparoscopic Hellas myotomy. Various series talks about close to 4 to 6%. In my experience of I think close to 100 procedures in past 10 years, we never come across any perforation during procedure. So I believe that it is not very common thing to have a perforation doing a laparoscopic myotomy because you are doing procedure under high degree of magnification. I think it's very rarity to have perforations. And if at all perforation happens, what to do? If the perforation happens at the beginning of the myotomy where you are not done the myotomy, better is close full thickness and start a myotomy elsewhere. You have noticed you have completed the myotomy, then you have noticed a perforation. Your endoscopist was doing, and he has shown that there is a minor perforation is there. Then you can close it with meticulously the 4-0 Vicryl, and you can add a DOR fundoplication. So there are what are the outcome predictors while performing the success of the Heller's cardiomyotomy? The pre-op LEA pressures if more than 35, and if you have a greater decrease in LES pressure after myotomy, so the success rate is good. Sigmoid esophagus, the success rate is less. If you have a failed prior endoscopy procedure, either pneumatic dilatation, failure, the success rate is definitely less when compared to the people who never had any intervention or there is no failure. Again, now we are talking about Chicago's classification, type 1, type 2, type 3. So what earlier speakers talked about the success rate of type 3 poem, where the poem has a much success rate. So, but definitely the success rate of poem, if you take the literature, is more, but it is not statistically significant. The latest randomized control trial, which talks about which published this year in Annals of Surgery, where the difference is 83% versus 78% in type 3 achalasia cardia, where the poem success rate is 83% and it is the surgical success rate is 78%. So it's not really, the literature is not much, but at this point of time, what has poem has proven that equivalent results can be given with the poem along with the surgery, and it can be performed safely head on head when you compare to surgery. This is what the literature talks about. Posterior, how the procedure is done is usually we don't dissect the. I think this part I think I'll cover during while I'm doing. The important is for the people to understand. These are all the clasp fibers of lower esophageal sphincter. These are all the oblique sling fibers. One has to divide these clasp fibers of lower esophageal sphincter to get a good relief. So here, if you see here the circular muscle is not really circular. It is only semicircular. What we call is as a clasp fibers. But to get in, usually these are all thickened in achalasia. If you want to get a good relief of dysphagia, that you have to take care of that clasp fibers. This is a normal port position of standard port position of for the procedure. Just take you through You able to see? This is where the image is showing a classical achalasia picture.
So we are not able to see the video, sir.
Not able to see? Okay, 1 minute.
It got stuck, sir. Actually, you can reshare it once again.
Okay.
Meanwhile, if there are any questions, the audience may type their questions in the chat box. We'll ask the questions at the end of the talk.
Are you able to see? Are you able to see now?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it's okay. So this one basic steps where we lesser momentum is taken care with the help of harmonic shapes, and the one which Rakesh was talking about, you have to take remove this phenoesophageal membrane to enter into the hiatus. Then usually we don't do a posterior mobilization because we believe that not doing a posterior mobilization of the esophagus, you can avoid a reflex, little bit decrease in the reflex rate. Now you can see the hiatus is being exposed. So important aspect is preserving the anterior vagus. So if you see that anterior vagus is looped, and we just one marker has been put because if you sacrificing the vagus, will have complications. Whatever the post diarrhea, all these issues can be there. Now we are started doing myotomy. Usually the myotomy we start on the esophagus side, little away from the GE junction to begin with. There you will get a nice spleen. Usually we use less energy because we don't want to have a delayed perforations related to the cautery. So here what we do is we create a tunnel and first nicely reach a place. Then after doing that, you can use the energy like a harmonic or not. So you can see these are these longitudinal fibers now where there's a circular fibers one can appreciate. Very difficult to make perforations because you are working under magnification. Now you can see a nice submucosal plane has been developed. So they are the circular fibers, and usually this muscle is not that thick in esophagus in a normal patient. This thickened muscle is a clear-cut indication of achalasia. You can see this mucosa is seen, and once you create a small place of 1 centimeter like that, in that plane is very easy to dissect. And coming towards the gastric side, the very importantly, the perforations are common in the gastric side because there certain times it's very thin, and now we are making a tunnel under the vagus. This is the vagus. Usually, invariably, the tunnel that passes behind the vagus because the vagus, anterior vagus, always crosses the esophagus. So your myotomy will be on either side of the vagus. So once you finish your procedure, you will have a myotomy below and above the vagus. So you can see this. These are the class fibers I'm talking about that one has to release. So a lot of times what we do is we request usually our same endoscopist colleague or gastroenterology colleague who has done the prior to the procedure endoscopy. We request him only to do the on-table endoscopy after the procedure, such that he can recognize the difficulty, resistance, and all these things, because that is very useful. That also gives confidence for the surgeon during, because we don't want to have a recurrence after the procedure, because naturally when we're doing surgery, we don't want to have a recurrence rate, so we want to confirm during surgery. So once after ensuring compartment, now the endoscopist is doing the endoscopy to ensure that there is myotomy is adequate and also there is no leak. So usually we see air bubbles. You can see there is no air leak. Then what we do is we do a wrapping. This is here the wrapping is called DORS procedure. So the only downside of POEMs is reflex procedure. Reflex is close to a tune of 40% in a lot of series. Probably that is where today the HLS has an edge when compared to POEM. But I think they're also coming with a solution where people are, I think, started doing endoscopic POEM along with what you call as fundoplication through the endoscopic. Probably once, if it is achieved, I think the reflex rates of POEM also will come down if we add a procedure again endoscopic fundoplication sort of procedures. So this is the completion of the DORS fundoplication. So certain times
Hello.
yeah, sorry. You able to see?
Yeah, now.
Yeah, this is a patient where this is a small video I just finished up. So this patient had a surgery, Heller's myotomy before, and you can see these are huge esophagus occupying the entire chest. This esophagus is what you call as end-stage achalasia. It doesn't mean doing any procedure short of esophagectomy is not going to help for this patient. So this patient, we performed a thoracoscopic esophagectomy. The main challenge remains doing an esophagectomy in a patient of end-stage achalasia is the planes, because it will go on in a different planes, tortuous, close to the blood vessels, and usually the muscular arteries are very, big esophageal arteries will be there. So achieving a hemostasis is very important. That's why, the complication rate of esophagectomy in achalasia, if you do a transhiatal esophagectomy, is morbidity is very, very high. Here, the advantage in a thoracoscopy is you are doing under vision. All these, you can see, see this, there's a esophageal vessels, how big vessels we are keeping, but usually you won't see that much big vessels because of the hypertrophy of the muscle, long-standing hypertrophy. So usually these vessels will become much bigger vessels you will see. So with this, circumferentially dissected the esophagus from the surrounding structures like all the trachea and heart, bronchus, all these structures is nicely separated. And now important is because the navigation, because it will be tortuous, it will going into different planes. So one has to be careful while doing surgery on a sigmoid esophagus. So now almost I think the mobilization part is done. So once after this, what we do is if the patient was in a prone position, and again we turn the patient, then we do complete the procedure either with laparoscopically, or we can see this, the esophagus is so big. This is the stomach. So the stomach conduit is taken, and again see this, the esophagus is like a stomach, such a big esophagus. So these people with this sort of end-stage achalasia, one will get benefited by doing an esophagectomy and gastric pull-up. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's nice comprehensive review of the surgical option in management of achalasia, sir. I think we'll go for the question answer session now. All the three talks were absolutely wonderful. So first question, so what is the risk of GERD post-poem? Should all patients be on lifelong PPI? This is to Rakesh.
I think the important question here is that how do you define the GERD in these patients? And that was the problem. See, when people started doing poem, in order to be sure whether these patients are having reflux, what they initially started doing is that all the poem patients, they started undergoing 24-hour pH manual, 24-hour pH with impedance. And what Prasad Babu sir just quoted, the incidence of 40% of GERD was actually based on the initial data where they started seeing the 24-hour pH reflux. And in these patients, how you define the GERD matters. Is it the 24-hour pH aberration, or is it the esophagitis on endoscopy, or you want to take the symptomatic symptoms of the patient to label them as GERD? So I think what initially people realized that probably the what is being quoted as 40% was more based on the 24-hour pH, not on the based on symptoms. And so now even the latest Chicago 3 has taken out 24 pH as a test to be done in all the post-poem patients, and it should not be taken as the modality to label them as GERD. So now, as per the latest Chicago 3, any patient post-poem, if they have a documented symptoms of reflux, they are to be taken up for endoscopy to know whether these patients have esophagitis. And the recent RT meta-analysis that was published in 2019 from Italy by Repisian et al., they have shown that if you are taking symptoms as to define GERD, then it is no more than 12%. And for the 12% of your patients who have symptomatic GERD, putting them on PPI is good enough. And most of these patients, even if they have esophagitis, it is only type A or type B, that is mild esophagitis, and most of them do good with a single dose of PPI. I think this much is what the literature is putting up now. So I think the 40%, sir, is little on the higher side, Prasad Babu, sir. So I think it was based
I think, I think there are a lot of paper publications. This year you can see endoscopic myectomy international multi-center experience. They also talk about good incidence of reflux. And the same thing forget about poem. Before itself, there was a lot of debate in the surgical part whether to add a fundoplication or not, because to compare the data. I think, as I told, I think now the consensus is even the reflex is controllable with PPA. I think it's not much evidence, but whether how much extent it is going to give esophagitis or Barrett's and all these are all, I think we don't have much data. I think probably now, I think you people within a short while you are going to come up with a lab fundoplication, endoscopic fundoplication to add up whatever the downsides of poem probably. I think now some publications have started coming up with doing some endoscopic fundoplication by the end of the poem. I think this.
Sir, actually, for the want of time,
I think very important.
slides.
I think very important aspect of for poem is failed Heller's myotomy, where because poem is really helpful, and for that endoscopist to do only in a failed Heller's myotomy, he has to do that procedure in a normal regular patients. Otherwise, you cannot ask him to only perform in a failed Heller's myotomy. I think data is picking up, and lot of, I mean, it has proven its efficacy and safety is I think it's almost reached with the poems, I think.
Sir, actually, for the lack of time, for the want of time, I did not show you that additional slides. Sir. I prepared that slide because I knew you would come for reflex.
The second question is the same actually. Would you combine fundoplication with poem, and how feasible it is?
Sir, I think if you can allow me, I have just one slide to show you, sir. I think that might answer the next two questions, if permission given from your end. Is it okay, Vishnu?
Yeah, go ahead, Rakesh.
Yeah, I think I had a couple of more slides, but I didn't show it for the want of time. I think is it visible now? So I think I had quite a few slides on that, but I think so. I think I just wanted this slide. I just removed this slide because poem, it has shown a significant response, be it dysphagia, Eckhart score, Elias pressure, or the esophageal emptying time. Everything has come down post procedure. But there is one thing that has always troubled the endoscopies, that is the GERD. I think GERD stands out to be the Achilles heel for the poem. But again, if I am to pose the literature back, if you look at the literature, it's how you define the GERD. Is it the abnormal pH? Is it the esophagitis on endoscopy, or it's the symptoms? And if you look at this meta-analysis where the reflux of poem and Heller's was compared, even Heller's can give rise, in spite of good fundoplication, these patients can come back with reflux. And if you can look at the data, symptomatic reflux, if it is seen in 19% of poem patients, 8 to 10% of post-Heller's also can come back with reflux symptoms. And if abnormal pH is taken as your criteria, as Prasad Babu sir was quoting 39 to 40%, it is only abnormal pH. Well, even Heller's can pick up 16 to 18%. I think this is what the data says. So this is one slide which I wanted, but I deleted it. Probably still poem, that is one nagging problem, that is reflux. It is still 20 to 30%. This is what we know. But what we also know is that it's only grade A to grade B, that is mild, mostly controlled with single dose of PPI, and majority of the patients do not come back. And as sir is saying, we are also learning. We have also started understanding that we can do better to bring down the reflux. The first thing that people started noticing is that limiting the cardiomyotomy to less than 2 centimeters. This was the first thing we started doing when we are doing poem to reduce it. And as Prasad Babu sir rightly pointed out, now people have understood who are doing poem is that instead of doing a blind myotomy, it is always better that once you reach the G junction, start shifting to the right side. That is the myotomy to be focused more on the clasp fibers, sparing the sling fibers. So if you spare the sling fibers, just like the surgeon would do, I think we can bring down the incidence of the reflux that is seen with poem. And of course, finally, the big thing which sir was just mentioning, that is, if you want to really take it on with the Heller's, I think fundoplication can be added to poem. This is called as poem F. Again, the master of poem, that is Inoue, he has already published his novel procedure that is called poem F, where after doing the myotomy, he has passed another scope into the abdominal cavity, and he has performed a wrap around the myotomy that is done. So this is what is known as, I mean, if you want to do it the Heller's way, do a wrap and probably totally take care of the reflux that might come up. Thanks for that opportunity. So I think that probably might answer a few of the queries being put, Vishnath.
Yes, Rakesh. I think, but Prasad Babu sir may still not be happy. Sir's comments.
I think he has told the same thing. No, we have discussed same thing.
So for poems, definitely GERD is an issue, but we are fastly learning it now. We are restricting the myotomy. We are shifting more to the clasp fibers. And what I can quote probably more confidently is that now that I have the numbers, I mean, I have been following all these patients diligently. And in the last 3 years, of all the 90 plus patients that I have done, not more than 20 patients are reporting reflux, symptomatic reflux where they needed a PPI. Most of them, they are happy for the simple reason that all these years they were struggling to eat food, and suddenly an opportunity has come and a procedure has given them a chance to swallow the food easily. So most of them probably are not coming back with the issue of reflux, but I keep looking into all these patients, and what I can tell you confidently is that out of the 90 patients we have done, 20 are suffering with GERD, but most of them, they're happy and they're doing away with a single dose of PP.
Yeah, then the next question is about what are the contraindications for poem?
I think as sir has rightly shown that classical example, that is, end stage achalasia. If you have a grossly distended esophagus, there's nothing much a poem would achieve. I think sir would do the more justice to that. And of course, even the sigmoid S2 type of esophagus, if you have a sigmoid S2 type of esophagus or an end stage achalasia, I think poem is not the right procedure to go for.
Shall I add another indication?
Yes, sir.
Contraindication?
Yes, sir.
Certain times when you have an esophageal diverticulum, with achalasia, probably there a role for, again.
Sir, initially probably it was thought of that probably diverticulum would pose a problem, but now the recent change in the thought process is that what they're saying is that when you are doing myotomy, probably switch to the direction where you have a diverticulum and open up the divert. So this is the new thing, sir. But rightly said, initially it was thought to be a contra, but now we have started doing. In fact, we have done one patient who had a divert. So what we did is that when we are doing the myotomy, we just shifted towards the diverticular side and we opened up the muscles.
Okay.
A question to Ravi Shankar sir. I had already asked him, sir, your experience about treating these patients of achalasia.
I think I might have done about more than 500 patients with pneumatic dilatation. And usually we counsel the patients that the response rate would be about 75% with pneumatic dilatation. And I'm one of the first ones to start conventional manometry in Hyderabad. Earlier when we were doing conventional manometry, there was these types of achalasia were not known. So whether it is achalasia or not, and some of the achalasias were missed as well. From that time onwards, pneumatic dilatation did play a good role. Subsequently, with the advent of high resolution manometry, we are able to categorize the achalasias into 3 types, and where the second type would be very beneficial with pneumatic dilatation. The pneumatic dilatation would take just about 10 minutes. And if we do properly, the success rate is very good, especially in type 2. In type 3, then we need to tell the patient and counsel the patient that the pneumatic response is only about 50%. Educate the patient about the POEM, about the lap hurlers, and then take the opinion of the patient also. I think we should have all the procedures that should be available to us. That means all the 3 modalities. And we should also counsel the patient about these modalities, and the patient's opinion also should be taken into consideration, because nowadays Google patients are they Google and come back to us, so we can give them an option. So with us, I think we have all the options available, and then we need to discuss with the patient. Some educated patients, they decide their procedure, and I think we should be able to offer any procedure to them. And regarding the perforation rate, in my experience, I don't recall any perforation. And I think I'm very fortunate that I did not have perforation. At initial days, probably we're a little more conservative in dilating, but now definitely we do good dilatation. And I have slightly modified the technique as I have told, and the radiopaque markers at the GE junction, they are quite useful. And this will help us in noticing if the balloon is going down. So this gives a high percentage of success rate. But I think nevertheless, going by the world literature and going by our experience also, there are some patients who fail pneumatic dilatation. And of course, the procedure like a POEM should be learned, and the experience with laparoscopic Heller's myotomy is very valuable, and it helps our patients.
Right, sir. Thank you, sir. I think one last question, Rakesh. Would you like to send a patient for POEM or lap Heller's in a patient who had fundoplication?
I mean, come again, Vishnath. I mean,
patient underwent pneumatic dilatation and has a recurrence. Do you prefer to do a
patient already underwent a pneumatic dilatation and he has come back with recurrence of symptoms?
Yeah.
And what is the procedure you want to do? Obviously, I'm biased, Vishnath. I would take a POEM as an option.
Oh.
And it is simply, it's like this, Vishnath. Now that the numbers are on my side, probably I'm more confident. I have done post-pneumatic, I have done post-Hellers. The only reservation I had initial days was that when you do a pneumatic dilatation, and if it is very well done, it induces scarring. So at the G junction, there might be submucosal fibrosis. So at times, the fibrosis does trouble us. So I think that's one point to keep in mind. But given the option here is that, since the poem has given us two approaches, you have a posterior and an anterior approach. So if my posterior approach, I fail to tunnel beyond the G junction because of extensive submucosal fibrosis, I might change my approach, come back and start doing anterior tunneling. And usually, we would end up going on to the other side of the LES. So I think even if the patient has undergone a pneumatic dilatation right now, I can confidently tell you that I think we can do a poem.
Right. Thank you, Rakesh. One last question to Prasad Babu, sir. Sir, in the patients who had undergone HELLAS earlier and has a failure, what do you suggest?
One has to see whether it is if it is not in the stage of Asia. I think when we have an expertise, I think we should send to the poem because that will be a more ideal case. See, if you don't have an expertise in the center, like different aspects.
Audio is not clear, sir. One moment.
Hello?
Audio is not clear, sir. Prasad Babu, sir. Can you repeat the statement? It is audible, sir, but I think there is some break in the voice. Maybe other people should mute themselves.
Expertise.
Maybe network issues, sir, actually.
And if we
Now it's
have a
better.
failed LS myotomy, I think poem
Now
is
it
the
is
choice
the-
now. See, if you don't have an expertise, then probably we can go for a redo LS. But given a premise situation where we have the facilities for both the things, I think the option would be sending the patient to poem. We may fail LS myotomy.
Right, sir.
Literature support that in a post-HELLAS failure, pneumatic dilatation can be helpful and it can
Yes,
be a
sir.
modality.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
This is
And,
well recorded in literature.
I think earlier in post-HELLAS failure, we were sending back to pneumatic dilatations, definitely. That's what Dr. Ravishankar sir told. Pneumatic dilatation is also a good modality to look for. I think it's all personal, institutional preferences where we can use all these modalities and we can sometimes involve the patient is also in a decision-making process actually.
Right, sir. I think
we are happy
had
that all
comprehensive.
modalities are available with us and we can select the modality based on the patient's requirement and patient's wish. I think it's good to have all the modalities available at a single roof.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think that should be the concluding remark. You're already getting delayed. I think it was a very good lecture given by all the three speakers. All three are the gems of gastroenterology, as I said. So I think we'll just conclude this session for today. Thank you very much for patient hearing.
Thank you, sir. Good night.
Thank you all, sir. Good night.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Vishwanath. Thank you, sir. Ravishankar sir. Thank you,
Thank you.
Rakesh. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.